Plan on flying? In order to board domestic flights, your driver's license or state-issued ID must be a real ID. Learn how to get your real ID today at tsa.gov/real ID or visit your local DMV.
All right, so welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty impactful. It's the immigration policies that President Trump enacted during his second term. We're going to be using this excerpt called Pasted Text to really dig into this, and I'm really excited to talk about this today. You know, I think for a lot of our listeners, this is a really important topic, just to kind of understand how these policies affected communities and you know, how they played out in the real world.
Absolutely.
So let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
One of the things that really stood out to me in this excerpt was the immediate action. I mean, almost as soon as President Trump came back into office, he declared a national emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border. Thousands of troops were deployed.
Yeah, right off the bat, you know, it was a huge show of force, right? And I think it really underscored, you know, how he was going to approach immigration in his second term. You know, some people argued that it was really just about, you know, fulfilling these campaign promises that he made or playing to his base.
Right.
But, you know, you could also see it as a way to sort of, you know, project strength on the world stage, you know?
Yeah.
Make a statement. And I think strategically what it did was it allowed the administration to kind of bypass some of the legal hurdles that they might have faced and really kind of funnel resources more directly towards immigration enforcement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was a huge statement.
Yeah.
And it really did set the tone, like you said, for how things were going to go. And it wasn't just at the border, right? The excerpt talks about a lot of changes that were happening internally, too.
Yeah.
Like the expansion of this thing called expedited removal.
Yeah.
Can you kind of break down what exactly that is for folks who might not be familiar with that term?
Sure. So expedited removal has actually been around for a while, but the Trump administration, they really kind of put it into overdrive. Essentially what it does is it speeds up deportations, and it often bypasses the traditional court hearings. You know, people who support it, they'll say, well, look, it's all about efficiency. You know, we have this backlog of cases. This is a way to kind of deal with it more quickly. But then you have critics who say, well, hold on a second. This really undermines due process, right? Especially for people who may have legitimate asylum claims, right?
Yeah.
But they're not even getting a chance to present their case fully because of this fast track.
Yeah. And I think that's a really crucial point that this excerpt brings up. It's like this tension, right, between this need for efficiency and enforcement. But then also, we can't just throw out due process, right? Like, these are real people's lives that we're talking about.
It's a balancing act, right? And it's not always, you know, black and white.
No.
It's not always clear cut.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this whole debate so complex and so challenging. And you know, while we're talking about complexity, we have to talk about sanctuary cities, right? Because this became a really, really big flashpoint.
Yeah. And that's another one of those terms, I think, that gets thrown around a lot. But can you explain what exactly is a sanctuary city? And are these cities actually breaking the law?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think, you know, sanctuary cities, they're not outright breaking federal law. But what they are doing is they're choosing to limit how much they cooperate with federal immigration enforcement.
Right.
It's kind of like this. They're basically saying, look, we're already strapped for resources at the local level, right? Our police have a lot on their plates, and we want to make sure that we're prioritizing public safety, you know? And for us, that means focusing on things like violent crime, right? We don't want to be spending our time and money helping IC track down you know, people who are just undocumented.
So it's about prioritizing. It's about allocating those resources.
Yeah.
But also, I imagine it's about maintaining trust, right?
Absolutely.
Within these communities.
Yeah. Because if people are afraid to report crimes because they're afraid they're going to get swept up, you know, in an ICE raid or something, then, you know, that's not good for anybody.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But obviously, the Trump administration didn't love this whole sanctuary city thing.
Right. No, not at all. I mean, they saw it as a direct challenge to their authority. You know, they viewed it as like, you know, undermining their efforts.
Right.
And so they tried to pressure these cities in a variety of ways. You know, they threatened to withhold federal funding.
Right.
You know, there was a lot of back and forth. It really created a lot of tension, you know, between local and federal governments.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, beyond that, it also created this climate of fear and uncertainty within these immigrant communities.
For sure. And the source material doesn't shy away from the human impact of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about these widespread arrests that were happening, this sense of anxiety, that really just permeated these communities.
But I think it's also important to point out that, there were and still are very different perspectives on these policies, right? Like, these were not universally accepted or embraced. Oh, absolutely. And I think it's important to understand, both sides of the argument here. So you have folks who really supported these measures. They argued that, this is about national security. This is about maintaining the rule of law. This is about controlling who comes into the country and who stays. And, they would point to things like, the potential for crime or the strain that, undocumented immigrants might place on social services, or, even the idea that, they're taking jobs away from American citizens.
Right. And I can see how, in their minds, it's all about protecting American jobs, protecting the economy, protecting the country. But I have to admit, like, when I read about these things, I get a little uneasy about the potential for, erosion of civil liberties. How do the supporters of these policies, how do they kind of reconcile that concern?
Yeah, no, it's a totally valid concern. And I think, the people who are in favor of these types of policies, they would often say, look, we're focusing on people who have broken the law, undocumented immigrants who have broken the law. And so any negative impact that might be felt by others, they would see it as either unintentional, or they would say, look, it's a necessary trade-off for the greater good.
Right.
If we have to inconvenience some people to keep the country safe, that's what we have to do. And they would also argue, look, this is a way to deter future illegal immigration. This is a way to encourage people to come through the legal channels.
Right. So it's about sending that message.
Yeah, exactly.
Setting that precedent.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the economic argument, which is always so complex.
Right? Yeah. Always a can of worms.
Yes, absolutely.
And this excerpt, it touches on that, and I think that there is no easy answer. And I think that it's something that's still debated to this day.
Right.
There are studies out there that will show, that undocumented immigrants actually contribute quite a bit to the economy through their labor, through their spending. Right. But then you have other studies that suggest, maybe they're actually creating a drain on public resources.
Yeah.
And so, the reality is somewhere in the middle, right?
Right.
And it probably depends on what industry you're looking at, what location, what specific individual circumstances.
Yeah.
It's messy.
Yeah, for sure. So as we kind of wrap things up here, we've talked about a lot. We've gone from, this national emergency declaration to expedited removal to sanctuary cities. And I mean, it's clear that this topic of immigration is just fraught with all these competing interests, these different values, these, potential consequences that are hard to predict. So what do you think, what's the big takeaway for our listeners? Like, what should they be thinking about after hearing all of this?
I think the big takeaway is that, immigration policy, it's not simple. There's no easy answers. And I think that the impact of the policies that were enacted during this time, they continue to ripple, throughout society today.
Yeah.
And so I think, the question that I would leave listeners with is, what do you think the long-term impact of these policies is going to be on the social and political landscape of the U.S.?
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to lead to a more secure nation, like the supporters argue? Or do you think it's going to lead to deeper divisions and an erosion of trust in the government?
Yeah, I think those are great questions to be thinking about. And, to our listeners, there's no right or wrong answers here. These are things that we all have to kind of grapple with and figure out for ourselves. But I think the important thing is that, you're understanding the complexity, the different motivations behind these policies, and the potential consequences that they can have, both the good and the bad, the intended and the unintended.
Exactly.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.
Today is your lucky day. Today is the day that our $3 website works for you, paying you directly to your PayPal daily. Imagine $3 ongoing continuous payments to your PayPal account. Imagine falling asleep and waking up to $300 in your PayPal account. How would this make you feel? How could this help you? What bills could you pay? What kind of fun could you have? What does that retirement look like now? All for a one-time payment of $3. This website is DFY done for you, fully built and completely hosted, and never stops collecting payments for you. You have spent $3 on coffee on a regular, but that coffee won't help you create multiple streams of income. Click the link below.